Maggie Donovan grew up on an Ohio farm that withered in a drought, losing her husband to a heart attack and raising her son Ethan alone. Ethan, a tall boy with a kind smile, dreamed of being a doctor, but joined the army to fund school, deploying to Afghanistan. Hi everyone, welcome to Life Unveiled. Let's get started. Maggie sat on the porch of her weathered home, where the paint had peeled to grey planks and the railings creaked under gusts blowing in from the fields. She was 53, but the past 2 years had aged her decades. Deep lines carved around her mouth, her once golden red hair faded to grey, and her blue eyes, vibrant in youth, now stared blankly, as if burned out from within. She clutched a photo of Ethan, him in a khaki uniform, buzz-cut hair, flashing that crooked, warm smile she adored. Beside it on the worn table sat his Purple Heart medal mailed by the army and a box of his belongings, a battered leather journal, a couple of folded letters, and a dog tag etched with his serial number. She hadn't opened that box since it arrived. Touching his things meant admitting he was gone for good, and that was a pain she couldn't face. Every morning, she brewed coffee in an old tin percolator, set 2 mugs on the table, one for her, one for Ethan, and sat, staring at his empty chair, listening to the silence that had become her companion since his death. Life dragged on, slow as the river beyond town, choked with reeds. Maggie worked at the local library, a dusty room with wooden shelves, sorting books, handing them to the rare visitor, answering questions like, "Where's the fishing section?" But her mind always drifted back to her son. She remembered him as a kid racing around the yard with a homemade bow, or as a teen helping her fix the fence after a storm, or at 18, hugging her tight before leaving for boot camp, promising, "I'll be back, Mum, you'll see." Why did he go? Why didn't he come home? The army's letter was as cold as a winter wind. "Your son died in combat in Kandahar province." No details, just a date and some captain's signature. She wrote to headquarters, begged for more, called the numbers listed in their replies, but the responses were identical. Classified operation, details unavailable for security reasons. At first, she raged, yelling at empty walls, smashing mugs on the floor. Then she cried until no tears remained. Finally, she withdrew, letting an emptiness grow inside, chapel her like weeds overtaking her soul. Sundays, she went to church. A small building with white walls and stained glass windows smelling of wax and aged wood. She sat in the back pew, clutching a prayer book, whispering words for Ethan's soul, but her heart found no peace. Father Thomas, the elderly priest, spoke of sacrifice for freedom, how God takes the best, but Maggie wanted to scream, "I don't want this freedom, give me my son." She stopped arguing, just nodded and left, dropping $1 in the offering basket by the door. At home, she'd sit by the window, staring down the road he'd taken, first to camp, then to war, imagining him walking back, waving, laughing. But the road stayed empty, only wind chasing leaves across the pavement. One bleak November day, as rain drummed on the tin roof and grey clouds smothered the sky, a knock rattled the door. Maggie rose from her armchair, adjusted her faded sweater, and opened it. A man stood there, about 30, lean, with short dark hair damp from the drizzle and a long scar running from his temple to his chin, like someone had tried to carve out a chunk of his face. He wore a worn green jacket and held a beat-up khaki army rucksack. "Mrs. Donovan?" he asked in a low, slightly raspy voice. She nodded, her heart clenching as if sensing something big. "I'm Ryan Keller. I served with Ethan. May I come in?" She stepped aside, gesturing to a chair at the kitchen table. He sat, set the rucksack on the floor, and stared at his hands, rough, with chipped nails, for a long moment before speaking. "I should have come sooner," he started, and Maggie noticed his fingers tremble, saw him clench them as if hiding weakness. "But it took me 2 years to work up the nerve to face you. Ethan saved my life, and I want you to know what kind of man he was." She froze, gripping the table's edge until her knuckles whitened. Her breath grew heavy, a lump lodged in her throat, but she stayed silent, afraid to interrupt. Ryan looked up, his brown eyes glistening with tears he fought to hold back, and began his story. They'd been in the same platoon, Ethan, the medic with a pack full of bandages and syringes, always ready to die for a wounded man, and Ryan, the rifleman whose gun was an extension of his hands. They'd been sent into the Kandahar Mountains to scout a Taliban base. Intel promised an easy run, but it was dead wrong. "There were 12 of us," Ryan said, staring at the floor as if seeing those men again. By the end, only 4 were left. Ethan could have bolted with the first group that pulled back, but he stayed. He painted that day with stark clarity, pulling Maggie into it. Blistering sun, dust clogging the mouth, gunfire echoing through the gorge, the stench of blood and gunpowder. They'd been surrounded, comms cut off, Taliban firing from the heights, turning the patrol into a shooting gallery. Ryan took a bullet in the thigh, collapsed in the sand, and the enemy closed in, bayoneting and clubbing the wounded. Ethan crawled to him through a hail of bullets, slit his pant leg with a knife, tied a tourniquet, dragged him to a boulder. He kept saying, "Hang on, Ryan, I'll get you out." Ryan's voice cracked, and he wiped a tear with the back of his hand. I yelled at him, "Run, leave me," but he wouldn't listen. Then came the grenade, a black blur in the dust. Ethan spotted it first, shoved Ryan behind the rock, and threw himself on it, smothering the blast. "I woke up in the dirt, covered in his blood," Ryan said, burying his face in his hands, shoulders shaking. "He died instantly so I could live." Maggie sat still, tears streaming down her cheeks, dripping onto the table, unnoticed. Her fingers dug into the wood, her chest so tight she could barely breathe. Ryan pulled a creased paper from his rucksack, a letter Ethan wrote her the day before he died but never mailed. "Mum," she read, lips trembling, "it's tough here, hot, and I'm tired, but I'm doing what I have to. I want you to be proud of me. I'll be home soon, I promise. Love you." She pressed it to her chest, choking on sobs, while Ryan sat quiet, looking away as if ashamed of his own tears. He stayed an hour, sipping coffee she set before him with shaking hands, and shared more about Ethan, how he'd crack jokes under fire to lift the squad's spirits, sing old tunes by the campfire. Once gave his chocolate ration to a wounded Afghan kid they found roadside. "He was the best of us," Ryan said, standing. "I'm alive because of him. Every day I wake up and think, this is his gift. I promise I won't forget." Maggie walked him to the door, clutching the letter, and whispered, "Thank you for coming." He nodded, pulled up his hood, and stepped into the rain, leaving her with the echo of his words. She returned to the porch, sank into the old rocking chair, staring at the wet road, and, for the first time in 2 years, smiled through her tears. Her boy hadn't just died. He'd become a hero, and that warmed her like a sunbeam on a cold day. Life shifted after that. She opened the box of Ethan's things, ran her fingers over his journal's pages, where he wrote about his buddies, the desert stars, his hope to come home and hug her. "Saved a guy from Texas today," one entry read. "He called me crazy, but he's alive. Miss you, Mom." The purple heart now stood on the mantel beside his photo, and she reread his letters every night, hearing his voice in the words. The emptiness in her chest began to fade, replaced by pride and a quiet strength. Maggie started talking about her son, to neighbours, library friends, even strangers picking up books. She shared his story, how he laughed, healed, gave his life for another. In church, she stopped sitting silently. She asked Father Thomas to mention Ethan in a sermon, and he did, calling him a light in the darkness of war. She planted red roses by the porch, Ethan's favourite as a kid, and thought of him each time she watered them. She realised he wasn't fully gone. He lived in her memory, in Ryan's words, in the lives he'd saved. One day, she wrote Ryan a letter, using the address he'd scribbled on a scrap, thanking him again and asking how he was holding up. A month later, his reply came, "I'm okay, Mrs. Donovan. Your son gave me a chance, and I'm trying not to let him down." She tucked that letter with Ethan's things. Another piece of proof he'd left a mark on the world. Losing her son shattered Maggie into pieces, but Ryan's story of Ethan's heroism pieced her back together, giving her life meaning again. she learned his love and sacrifice outlasted the war, leaving light in others' hearts, and that gave her the strength to carry on, cherishing his memory as a precious gift.
If you enjoyed the story, drop a like and subscribe for more tales like this. Hit the bell, and we'll catch you in the next one.